Tonight, 8 people are facing federal charges in the massive housing stabilization program fraud scheme.
America, remember when I told you about those federal raids in Minnesota a few months ago? Well, the other shoe just dropped and it's worse than we ever thought. 8 people have been charged in what prosecutors are calling a systematic $100 million fraud scheme that was supposed to help homeless people find housing. But here's the sick part. While vulnerable people are still living on the streets, these criminals were billing Medicaid for fake services and getting rich off of taxpayer money. And federal prosecutors just said Minnesota is drowning in fraud, with hundreds of fake companies stealing from the same programs.
Federal agents conducted search warrants looking for suspected fraud at businesses and homes across the metro. They raided 8 locations believed to be connected to the Housing Stabilization Services Program.
What is up, guys? Tyson De La Cruz here. Thank you so much for rocking with me. I called this months ago when these raids started happening, and now we're seeing the full scope of how Democrat incompetence enables this massive criminal enterprise. Let me remind you what I said about those federal raids back in July. I told you this was going to be massive and that Minnesota's so-called compassionate programs were run like criminal enterprises. Well, guess what? It's happening.
The Inspector General says 115 companies have been terminated from billing Medicaid while investigations play out. All those companies billed taxpayers a combined total of more than $100 million.
When I covered those raids, I told you this wasn't just a few bad actors. This was a systematic fraud enabled by Democrat policies that prioritizes feelings over accountability. And now we're seeing the truth of this all. 115 companies terminated, $100 million in fraudulent billing, and hundreds of fake businesses created solely to steal from the taxpayers.
Federal investigators say these providers operating out of the office suites and private homes recruited people experiencing housing instability and signed them up for the program. But instead of providing services, the search warrants claim the providers use the information to bill Medicaid.
Here's how this scam worked, just like I explained a couple months ago. These criminals would set up fake companies and run down office suites and even private homes. They target the most vulnerable people, folks just getting out of rehab who desperately needed housing help. They'd sign them up for services, then build Medicaid for the services that they actually never provided. And these people remained homeless. A few days ago, federal prosecutors charged 8 people with the first wave of arrests. The details are exactly what I predicted. We've got 4 guys running a company called Brilliant Mind Services that stole over $2 million. 2 brothers running Philadelphia took another $2 million. Asad Ahmed Ottawa, who owned Leo Home Services, stole another $2.7 million. And his brother also ran Liberty Plus, took another $1 million.
First round of indictments. Prosecutors say the suspects from Brilliant Minds pocketed as much as $400,000 apiece and shared a credit card to run up charges for all kinds of things. Investigators say the owner of Leo Human Services invested in real estate in Kenya, leased an apartment in Roseville, and even treated himself to a new BMW.
When the feds came a knocking, these fake companies disappeared overnight. All the locations locked up or empty because they never really were in business in the first place.
We're seeing webs or rings of connected providers that are working together to commit fraud. I've also seen businesses committing fraud that have tentacles throughout the Medicaid program.
The Inspector General confirmed these were a web or rings of connected providers. This wasn't people just padding their bills. This was organized criminal enterprise designed to steal from the taxpayers.
The program shelled out $302 million over 5 years. During that time frame, the state expected the program to cost only $12 million. DHS says it spotted signs of fraud in 2023 and started investigating right away. While it investigated, though, the potential fraud, it continued to pay claims tens of millions of dollars higher than expected. Then the feds raided multiple properties throughout the metro back in July, and today they announced charges against 8 suspects.
So how did Minnesota go from a $2.6 million program to a $100 million fraud scheme? It's exactly what I explained when I first covered this story. There was zero oversight. The state operated on a trust but verify system, except they forgot the verify part.
The millions of dollars in fraud uncovered within Minnesota state agencies is something Governor Walz is likely to face intense scrutiny for in his campaign for his third term as governor.
Acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson didn't mince any words. He said Minnesota is drowning in fraud and that this is another step in a much bigger reckoning this state needs to conform. During the initial raids and prosecution, I told you that this was just the tip of the iceberg, and it is.
In an email, Acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson says, quote, "Today's warrants are another step in a much bigger reckoning. This state needs to confront the scale of its fraud problem."
Remember the Feeding Our Future scandal where criminals stole money meant for hungry kids? Many of these scammers were involved in this too. So they went from stealing food from money from children to stealing housing money from homeless people trying to get clean. Now here's where it gets really interesting politically. Tim Walz is running for a third term as governor, and this massive fraud scheme is going to be front and center of that campaign.
I think he has failed to hold his agencies accountable.
Kristen Robbins is one of Walz's Republican opponents in the race for governor. She also is the chair of the House Fraud Committee, which held a Capitol hearing Wednesday.
State Representative Kristen Robinson, who's running against Walz, has made it clear that his handling of the fraud will be the cornerstone of her campaign. And she's right. How do you go from $2.6 million to $100 million in billing without anybody asking questions?
These are not political games. These are people's lives. This is about trying to help vulnerable Minnesotans get the services they need and protect taxpayers.
But of course, Tampon Tim Walz is trying to get ahead of this right before the legislation hearing on the fraud. He fired his assistant commissioner in charge of the Housing Stabilization Services program and issued an executive order to, guess what? Combat fraud.
That person was the assistant commissioner in charge of the state's housing stabilization program. The program is supposed to help homeless people find housing, but for months, our I-team has exposed systemic fraud.
Now, here's what gets me about this whole situation. This is the same pattern we're seeing in every blue state. They create these feel-good programs with zero oversight. Criminals figure out how to run the game and the system, and by the time anybody notices, hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer dollars are gone.
Democratic political analyst Jeff Hayden believes Walz is determined to fix the fraud issue, in part so it's not what he is remembered for as governor.
The Democratic analysts admit that Walz doesn't want his legacy to be about fraud. But there's the problem. When you create massive government programs with no accountability, fraud is actually inevitable. And the people who suffer the most are the most vulnerable populations these programs are supposed to help. They can make excuses all they want, but the bottom line is this. While politicians are patting themselves on the back for quote unquote helping people, criminals are stealing the money and people who actually need help got nothing.
I think the governor really is mission driven and wants to fight and to try to do as much as he can to protect Minnesotans. And I don't think he wants his legacy to be this issue of fraud.
America, when I covered those initial federal raids months ago, I told you that this fraud scheme was going to be massive. I told you Minnesota's compassionate programs were being run like a criminal enterprise. And I said this would become a major political problem for Tampon Timmy Walz. While Tampon Tim was busy being a nice guy governor and his administration was celebrating their compassionate programs, vulnerable homeless people are being used as pawns in a massive criminal enterprise. The money that was supposed to help them rebuild their lives went straight into the pockets of scammers. And now Walz is running for his third term, trying to convince voters that he can fix the problem he created through his own incompetence. The people of Minnesota deserve better than a governor who lets criminals steal $100 million while vulnerable people suffer. This is exactly why I like doing this, calling out these problems before they become a massive scandal. When you elect Democrats who prioritize feelings over getting results, you get exactly what was predicted. Massive fraud schemes that hurt the very people that they claim to help. Let me know what you think about this. Drop it down in the comment section down below. Smash the like button if you kindly would. Share, subscribe, and as always, guys, I'll catch you on the next one.